Welcome, AP Art History. We are going to be starting our unit on Islamic art. Islamic art is a pretty hefty section, but it still falls actually within Content 3 of early Europe and the Americas. I realize that early Europe, of course, felt very heavily Christian based, and that's because that was what was happening in early Europe. But we need to also bear in mind that Italy and France and all those kind of North European countries that we have been focusing on is not all of the world. And globally, there were other things simultaneously happening along with the development of Christianity. And so that is going to lead us into Islamic art. And what I really like about starting Islamic art is it spearheads the next few content areas that we will be focusing on, which are very culturally diverse content areas. We're going to be moving around the globe a little bit more and really learning about other cultures. The content areas are a little bit shorter in nature, but we're finally going to really experience some diversity. And like I said, Islamic art kind of spearheads that travel. So it's a very exciting unit and time for us to kind of shift gears and hopefully learn a lot of new things. So this is a brief video that I recommend that you watch. I have posted the Google Slides for you. It's a short, I don't know, maybe 6-minute video, but it gives a wonderful kind of quick understanding of Islamic culture and Muslim belief. I recommend that you watch it. It's really going to help you understand some of that content information. But I am going to take a moment and help provide you with some content information and some contextual information regarding Islamic art. It's impossible to be able to analyze and appreciate, dissect, and discuss an art form when you don't have some sort of basis of their cultural understanding. Hopefully, as you've been learning thus far, that art really imitates life. It really imitates society. It records what is happening in society and historically, politically, all of that. And so, if you have absolutely no bearing of kind of the cultural structure or societal belief system, it's going to be absolutely impossible for you to comprehend any of the art that we're going to look at. So, I'm going to give a very, very rundown kind of description of Islamic belief, Islamic practice, and then how that kind of translates into art. Sometimes I feel like I do these lovely religions an absolute disservice by just kind of providing you with the main points, but really that's all that we're able to squeeze into our year-long curriculum. So if at any point you feel that one of our subject areas sparks your interest even further, I definitely encourage you to learn more about it or ask me some questions and I can show you a deeper path. So I'm going to start with some basic historical background, and what I'm trying to do here is help ground you in our timeline. Again, we've been so heavily focused on Christianity that I'm sure it feels that that's all that was going on in the world. But I need you to shift that understanding and realize that there were, other cultures and other religions flourishing at the same time that Christianity was being developed. So for starters, Islam was started by Prophet Muhammad, whose very powerful religious messages, just like Jesus, resonated so deeply with the Arabs. And this is in, the 600s, so the early 7th century. By 750 CE, Islam had spread so much that North Africa, the Middle East, parts of Spain, India, and all the way into Central Asia were converted to Islam, or at least, they were also under a lot of Islamic dynasties. So this is a huge area, and I do have a geographical map to help you understand this, but this is a huge, huge, vast area that is practicing um, the religion of Islam. And when we look at the geographical map, you're going to see it in comparison to Christianity. Um, Abbasid Caliphate, who was Muhammad's uncle, he ruled the vast empire, the vast Islamic empire, from their capital in Baghdad. And this kind of sustained for a long time, until about 1258, when the Mongols had attacked Baghdad. And it was at this point that the Islamic world kind of split into two very distinct cultural divisions. You had your East and your West. The East consisted of the South and Central Asia, Iran, Turkey, Asia including India. And then the West was, the Near East, so that like kind of Mediterranean area, the Arabic Peninsula, North Africa, and then also many parts of Spain and even some parts of Sicily, which is part of Italy. Um, it's very reminiscent of Christianity, dividing into, um, the kind of, Christian and Protestant divisions as well. You're going to see lots and lots of parallels as we learn more about the surface of these world religions in order to appreciate the art that we're going to be looking at. I'm really hoping that you pick up on how many parallels there really are between the belief systems and the structures of basically most world religions. Um, Today, Islam exists in two principal divisions. So, from this East and West division in 1258, when the Mongols had conquered Baghdad, today we still have remnants of that division, and that division is the Shiite and the Sunni. Each are based basically on a different claim of leadership after the death of Muhammad, and that's why there's a lot of differences um, between practice and belief, even within the same religion. And if we compare that to, Christianity, we have that same thing. You think of all the different sects of religion or sects of Christianity, from, Lutheran to Catholic to Baptist. I mean, there's so many different versions and different, ways to kind of practice one religion. Islam kind of has the same. This is that map that I wanted to share with you, and just to help you get your bearings right here. We have Italy, okay, and we have the Mediterranean Sea. Here's Greece, okay. So all of this up here is Africa, and here we have, the Arabic Peninsula, and this map is showing you that kind of the growth of Islamic territory. And if we look at the black area here, this is the span of the Islamic territory at the death of Muhammad, and this is in 632 CE. But then by 661 CE, it starts to spread into the gray. We have the Islamic territory, okay? And then by 733, you can add the light gray. So coming up here into Spain, um, and over here more into the Far East. And then it also shows you as well, like these dotted areas. This is the Byzantine Empire, and then up here you have the Frankish Kingdom. So just being able to eyeball, the land mass that, and also how quickly Islam had spread. I'm hoping that this gives you really good bearings and really good understanding that this was happening simultaneously. So everything that we've learned thus far about the development of Christianity, the division, with the Protestants, the Reformation, the Counter Reformation, all of that, and how it affected the art of Christianity, the architecture, how all of that became developed. I now need you to reset your brain and understand that type of growth was happening also in the Islamic world. So I'm going to start by just kind of giving you the basis of Islamic belief. I've tried to divide up the religion into belief and then practice. And again, I'm just skimming. Like I said, I feel like I do a disservice to the religion, but hopefully this is enough to get you to be successful in this content. So basic Islamic belief, first and foremost, it is about oneness with God. Islam is a very beautiful religion. It's a very dedicated religion, and the main thread of being a practicing Muslim is really accepting and believing your oneness with God. And the way that they see God, I think, is a little bit different than Christians see God. Um, there's a lot of parallels at the same time. So again, I want you to notice those parallels. But Muslims believe that, God is the creator of all things. God is all powerful, all knowing. But I think one of the biggest differences is that Muslims are extremely um, outspoken about the fact that God is not a figure, God is not a person, God is not a being, God has no offspring, God has no race, no gender, no body, and is completely unaffected by any characteristics of human life. So, then the question is, okay, well, then what is God? Well, that's kind of the mystical and the spiritual um, acceptance of God, that it's almost undefinable. But even though it's undefinable, um, God is the creator of everything, all powerful and all knowing. Within Islamic belief, there's a lot of things that they believe in terms of their angels, the writings, the prophets. So the belief in angels. Um, Angels are kind of these unseen beings who worship God and carry out God's orders. They carry out God's orders through the universe, but they're not in like direct contact with humans. They kind of stay in that divine realm. Where if you kind of skip down and it talks about the belief in the prophets or the messengers of God. This is where prophets are different than angels, because Muslims believe that God's guidance has been revealed to humankind through these appointed prophets or messengers. And these prophets are sent down to earth to kind of reveal the the word of God. And so when you think about the prophets or the messengers in Islam, Basically, they believe that Adam was considered the very, very first prophet. And again, it's that, moving from the divine into the human world. So it's that, being able to transcend from one world to the other. And then they believe that the very last prophet, the last in this line of prophets, starting with Adam, then was Muhammad, and that Muhammad was sent to Earth for to interact with humankind and to directly send the message of Islam. So that's the difference between angels and prophets. Um, Muslims also believe in the books and the writings and the scriptures of God. And so there's a few of them. So all of these holy books or scriptures that have been revealed to the prophets and then brought to humankind, the first includes the Quran. So the Quran is the word of God that was given to Muhammad to share with all mankind. But then there's also more. There's the Torah, which was given to Moses. There are the Gospels, which was given to Jesus. The Psalms, which was given to David. The scrolls were given to Abraham. And they believe that out of all of those scriptures, that the only one that remains like as it was in its original form is the Quran, revealed by the Prophet Muhammad. And so the Quran is really kind of like their main holy book, and one that they feel that has been completely unchanged and untouched in its purest form. Just like Christians, Muslims believe in the Day of Judgment, that humans will be judged for their actions in this life, and those that followed the guidance and the guidelines of God will be rewarded with some sort of paradise, and then those who rejected God's guidance will be punished with hell. The difference is that Muslims believe in the divine decree. So the concept of God's will can be expressed as the belief that everything is governed by divine decree. Everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, the precious, everything has been kind of already not not necessarily predetermined, but that everything is part of God's will, okay? And so what that translates to is that whatever happens in one's life is God's will. And if you're a true believer, you need to be disciplined enough to respond to the good or the bad that befalls you, and kind of approach it with a sort of thankfulness or patience. So it's a very kind of disciplined mindset. There's not um, you know ways that you can have some sort of redemption. There's no confessionals. There's kind of no ways to really get out of it. There's no sense of karma like we have in Eastern philosophies. It's just kind of this acceptance that what becomes of your life is all part of God's will. And it's not to say that, okay, well, let's see, you can go out and murder 4 people, but it's okay because that's God's will. I mean, we can't confuse um, the divine decree with immoral behavior. Um, so it's kind of a confusing idea or thought, but it's something that Muslims are very disciplined on, and keeps them in terms of the humbleness within their worship. So if those are some of the belief structures, the main foundations of belief, then these are some of their kind of main ways of practicing. So we have things that we believe in, and then we have things that we have to do that kind of solidifies our beliefs. And for Islam, it's called the 5 pillars of Islam. And so the first one is Shahada, which is the profession of faith. And this is definitely the first pillar, that it's part of that declaration of belief that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. And one becomes a Muslim by being able to recite this phrase with absolute conviction. Like, this is the core of it all. This is something that you have to completely believe in. It's totally instilled within your heart and your mind and your body, and it becomes a true deep belief. The next pillar is Salat, and this is the practice of prayer. Muslims, they pray facing toward Mecca. So wherever you're at in the world, when you pray, you physically pray towards the direction of Mecca, and you do pray 5 times a day. You pray at dawn, noon, mid-afternoon, sunset, and then after dark. Prayer includes reciting of some of the surahs from the Quran, and it's sometimes performed on a very small rug or mat. And Muslims can pray individually, like within their home, or they can get together at a location and pray, in a large group at a mosque. I have learned from practicing Muslims that praying 5 times a day isn't necessarily the most able practice, and that in contemporary times that has been kind of dwindled down to maybe 2 or 3 times a day. It doesn't make you any less Muslim. It just kind of depends upon lifestyle and ability to pray and ability to devote. But for the most part, that's the standard practice. Next pillar is the zakat, and this is about giving of alms. And so, in accordance with absolute Islamic law, Muslims must donate a fixed portion of their income to community members in need. So, it it giving and providing and donating is not just part of their belief system and their practice, but it is also part of Islamic law. So in countries where church and state are both governed by Islamic law, it's kind of like paying taxes here. A portion of your earnings do get kind of donated, and there's many ways that you can provide some sort of service to others. I've learned that there's many ways to give alms, there's many ways to donate, but it's a very giving religion. It is, like I said, ingrained in the practice, and kind of like when you go to mass and they kind of pass around the plate. It's that's just like a standard practice in Catholicism, and it's the same thing for Muslims. It is standard practice that a portion of your benefits is donated to the needy. The next pillar is Psalm, and this is fasting. So during the daylight hours of Ramadan, I said daylight hours, which is the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, and the Islamic calendar is more of a lunar calendar. So actually, Ramadan doesn't always fall on the same day, every year. But in the ninth month of the Islamic calendar, all healthy adult Muslims are required to abstain from food and drink. Through this temporary, deprivation, they're able to renew awareness and gratitude for everything that God has provided in their lives. It also connects to giving of alms and the zakat. So, because during this time they share the hunger and the thirst of the needy, and is also a reminder of their religious duty to help those that are less fortunate. So that is what Ramadan is all about. And again, it's during the daylight hours. I do believe they will eat and drink, a small evening meal, but that's it during that month of Ramadan. And then the last pillar of Islam is Hajj, which is their pilgrimage. And every Muslim whose health and finances permit it must make at least one visit to the holy city of Mecca within their lifetime. And the Kaaba, which we will learn about, is a cubical structure that's covered in black embroidered hangings. And it is actually the Kaaba is at the center of the Haram Mosque in Mecca, and the Muslims believe that this is actually the house that Abraham built for God. And they face in its direction, which is called the Qibla, where they pray. So this is very important for all Muslims to pilgrimage to at one point in their life. This kind of solidifies their five pillars of practice. It's a communal practice that where they really do support each other and help each other complete this pillar of practice. So I'm going to transition a little bit into, you know, Islam and how it's related to art. So basically, just some foundations to Islamic art. Um, to begin, it's important to know, again, to just kind of reset your brain and take a mental break from so much Christianity that we had in this content area. But Islam is indeed the dominant religion in North Africa, West Asia, and Spain. It's a very diverse religion that we've talked about. Um, we know that Islam follows the word of the Quran, but religious imagery is absolutely 110% avoided and restricted in Islamic art. So for this entire content area, until we get to like some Persian manuscripts, we are not going to be seeing figural art at all. And think about how heavy that has been in our content area thus far with Christianity. Um, and so we're going to take a complete turn into a totally different style of art. When we talk about Islamic architecture, it's going to include mosques, tombs, and monuments. So mosques being, what a church is to Christianity. It's a place of gather and worship. Islamic art was spread through pilgrimage. So, as one of the five pillars of Islamic practice was pilgrimage. And if think about the concept of pilgrimage, people making their way to Mecca, you have a lot of travelers and, culturally, spreading their ideas and kind of spreading their customs. And we had the same thing, during that Romanesque time where pilgrimage was a way of worship, going into these churches and visiting these reliquaries and, kind of taking in that experience was a huge part of worship during, these early kind of European times. Cultural exchanges, though, were happening because of this on a really vast scale. So not only was pilgrimage a big part of these exchanges, but then we also at the same time had that lovely that Silk Road that connects those distant lands, economically and culturally. And remember, it's running through that same pathway of that spread of Islam between the East and the West. Because of intercultural exchanges, of course, we had a rich diversity of expression that would, in many ways, combine European, Asian, and Islamic sources, and you're going to see that a lot in this content area. Islamic art is definitely influenced by trade with surrounding traditions. Just like Christianity, big, large scale artwork, major or dramatic art was definitely the result of some sort of patronage by secular rulers, religious rulers, and the social elite. Textiles, metalwork, ceramics, and other objects were produced for the arts of the markets. But again, religious art contains absolutely no figures at all. But what we will be learning about is how Muslims use tessellations, calligraphy, and arabesques in their work. We already talked about how we do have figures that flourished in manuscript writing and secular writings found in Persia. We have Islamic art is known for some of their specializations, and some of those would be ceramics, uh, book and manuscript illumination, textiles, definitely, and metalwork. You're not going to see a lot of, those sculptures of like, marble reliefs and, there's no figural sculptures. Everything that we kind of took from, classical Greece and Rome and brought into, early European art, we're not going to see any of that at all. Um, art Islamic art definitely also avoids perspective. So all of that perspective we learned about, whether it be one-point perspective, atmospheric perspective, the use of foreground, middle ground, background, that the Italians and the Venetians were, worked so hard to attain, that does not exist in Islamic art at all. It's absolutely not part of their style and their way of adornment at all. We're going to see art that is completely design orientated and two-dimensional. We're going to see art that was more useful. There's definitely some decorative, but art that was more utilitarian and made for use. You're going to see lots of carpets and tapestries in Islamic art, and they're extremely prized examples of Islamic textiles. You're going to see elaborate prayer rugs, often and with these beautiful, intricate patterns and designs that often bear the mihrab motif. The mihrab is something that we will learn. It's an architectural term, and we'll learn more about the mihrab when we get into Islamic architecture. But this is kind of the shape, the mihrab shape, and you can see how these types of patterns are integrated into their textiles. Women were mainly the weavers of the rugs. This was done either with hand knotting or with actual weaving techniques. Islamic art also excels in manuscript decoration and as well as like small paintings, mostly Persian paintings. You're going to see Islamic designs are extremely complex and complicated. They are definite mathematical studies, full of geometry. And this was a direct metaphor. I mean, this again, is part of their belief system and the structure that the universe is definitely based on logic and mathematical design. So with that foundation kind of being laid out, and you know learning a little bit about the basis of Islamic religion, this is going to bring us into our images. And for this first screencast, because I'm splitting this screencast into part 1 and part 2, I'm going to take you through patterns and calligraphy. I've divided up the art images into 4 areas. You have patterns, calligraphy, Persian manuscripts, and architecture. And so for part 1, I'm going to get you through patterns and calligraphy, and then part 2 will be the remainder. Patterns. This is really the essence of Islamic art. You will see patterns in Islamic art in every way, shape, and form. You will see patterns in textiles. You will see patterns in architecture. You will see patterns in paintings, patterns in metalwork, patterns on manuscripts. It is really the foundation of Islamic style. There are 3 types of patterns that exist in Islamic art. You have the arabesque, the calligraphy, and the tessellation. These are examples. The first one here is the arabesque. In the center is an example of the calligraphy, and then the tessellation. Arabesque patterns are patterns that kind of come from nature. They involve kind of scrolling vines, lots of spirals, curvaceous lines. You're going to see, lots of flora and leaf patterns. That's what arabesque is. It's a repeated pattern, though, okay, mind you, but the content of the repeated pattern, again, is floral, vine-like, very curvaceous, and that makes up arabesque. Calligraphy here in the center, calligraphy is a highly specialized and such a high regarded artistic representation of Kufic text. Kufic text is basically it's the Arabic alphabet, but it's it's kind of like a divine version of it. So Kufic text is what is the way that the Arabic alphabet is expressed when being used for kind of divine purpose. So within mosques or within manuscripts and different types of um, scriptures and things like that, they'll use it's kind of like a fancier type of Arabic, and sometimes it becomes so complex and so decorative that it is almost difficult to be legible. But I don't want you to confuse the calligraphy with their everyday Arabic writing, Arabic alphabet. um, they are similar, but Kufic text is much more exaggerated. And then over here, these are the tessellations. These are basically geometric patterns that are, very mathematically elaborate, and they are content-wise made up really just of different types of shapes that endlessly fit together and endlessly repeat. The tessellations definitely demonstrate the Islamic belief that there is a unit in multiplicity, so that that these patterns represent that kind of the order of the universe, and that with the multiplicity becomes one, becomes whole. You'll see these tessellations done in a lot of tile work. So this is why I put this up here. So this is kind of like a mosaic tile work but you'll also see it in terms of paintings on a wall. Like I said, you'll see it within tapestries, and then you'll also see it within architecture. This is an amazing interior of a piece of architecture that we will be looking at, but I just again wanted to give you a peek at how highly decorative Islamic art is in terms of patterns. Most of the patterns definitely radiate from a central point. So in terms of art words, we've learned that that is, creates a radial balance. But also the point is that with these tessellations and with these patterns, these mathematical patterns that are created in Islamic art, that any point at all could actually represent the start. It's kind of like, a maze where, where's the start and where's the end. And oftentimes within these patterns, there is no start, there is no end. And that's kind of the point and the symbolism of it. The patterns are also designed to repeat not only to the edge but off the edge, so that it appears as if there is no end in sight. That just because maybe the wall has ended doesn't necessarily mean that the concept of the pattern ends. The concept of the pattern and the repetition of the pattern we know would continue on, if the wall continued on. So it's that kind of endless concept. That explanation of pattern is going to bring us to our first image. This is called the artable carpet. It's the it is a humongous carpet that is 34 feet by 17 feet. It is made with silk on wool threads. It's from 1539 to 1540, and it's made by Maksut of Kashan. And there's actually two of these carpets. We're just, looking at one right now, but it's an extremely huge carpet that is one of a matching pair. They come straight from a funerary mosque and a shrine. The shrine is of a Sufi saint, Shaykh Safi al-Din, and this is where this is the mosque and the shrine that housed this Sufi saint, and these were the carpets that were inside the mosque. These carpets are very, very common inside mosques, and they're common to be this large because this is the carpet where worshipers come to pray. So when you pray in your Muslim religion, you pray on the ground. There are no pews, there are no seats. You go directly to the ground, and so that is why the carpets are extremely important in Islamic culture because it supports their religious practice. You can see this beautiful design on the carpet, and the medallion in the center, it represents and almost kind of mirror images the inside of a dome with 16 pendants that kind of represents the mosque. We're going to learn about architecture and the importance of the dome within the mosque, but this is kind of what that is representing. What we have archaeologically, this is the world's oldest dated carpet. It is a wool carpet that was woven by 10 people, probably men. Women did indeed do a lot of weaving during this period, but the more important and of the carpet and the location and the size of the carpet usually would then be handed to experts that were usually men. There are 340 knots per square inch. So this is a knotted, hand knotted carpet. So what that means is you have all these like wool threads, if you kind of think like stringing a guitar, or all the if you think of like a piano, and all those, you have all those wool threads, and then you take little teeny tiny threads of silk and you knot over those wool threads. And again, this is 340 knots per square inch. Today, if you compare that to like today's rugs that are, manufactured in a factory, they are roughly 80 to 120 knots per square inch. This hand knotted is at 340. So it's absolutely amazing that this was created the way that it was. It's typical of Islamic art because you have a lot of those vegetative scrolls. You have a lot of the geometric patterns, symmetry, some of those like floral vines and flourishes. You have the arabesque. So a lot of times patterns, don't just segregate. It's not just arabesque or um, tessellation. Sometimes they come together within the same art piece, and the rug is a good example of that. Here's a close-up just to try to give you a larger appreciation of the amount of color that has gone into the rug, but also just the intricate design of all the different leaves and flower shapes and scrolls and repetition. It's amazing. And again, when you consider that this was all hand knotted, and again 340 knots per square inch. This is I don't recall which museum it's housed in, but this is how it is housed in the museum. It's completely covered by glass and protected, but it also kind of gives you a good understanding of the size of the carpet, remembering that they were a matching pair within the mosque. And then this is the placement of the pair of rugs within the mosque. You can see it was, in the center of a dome, and this is where worshipers would gather to pray. So we're going to move into some of our examples for calligraphy. Um, Calligraphy is a popular art form in the Islamic world, and again, it's based off of Arabic script. Arabic script, the Arabic alphabet is definitely a system of kind of swooping lines and some dots. And if you are unaware, the Arabic alphabet reads from the right to the left, okay? And it's an extremely precious and high form of art. It's very well respected. Um, the the respect comes from the understanding that this was how information was transmitted to reveal the word of God to Muhammad. And so therefore, calligraphers were the most respected Islamic artists. The Arabic alphabet has 28 letters, 17 different shapes. Like I said, is written from right to left. However, numbers are written left to right, just like we read them. And then the Kufic calligraphy is that kind of highly distinguished calligraphy. It's been reserved only for religious text, official text, and then it has also from there just evolved into a very high art form that's very ornamental and decorative style. So with that being said, this is our first image under calligraphy. It's called Folio from the Quran, and it's from the 8th to 9th century. We're looking at ink, so black ink, and gold, like a liquid gold, a luster gold on parchment paper. So Arabic writing is read left to right, like we've said, okay? And the Kufic script, this is also an example of Kufic script. So you're going to see very long horizontals and very strong uprights. A little bit, you know, it's much more exaggerated than a normal Arabic alphabet. We have difference between vowels and consonants. So consonants are scripted in dark brown and look very similar to each other. So the distinction between the consonants actually comes from these red dots. So I don't know if you can see these little red dots that are placed throughout, but those red dots are either placed above or below the script, and the vowels are represented by the red dots or markings around other letters. So you have the consonants that are in the brown, and then you have the vowels that are marked by the red dots. This is a page from the sacred text of Islam, and the Quran is translated to recitation, which signifies the importance of oral tradition and how the writings of the Qurans are a secondary form. So a lot of these manuscripts are so elaborately created because there is kind of that reliance on oral tradition. The same with a lot of the manuscripts from early Christian art. Only some people were able to read and were trained to read, and only some people were trained to write. And so even though you had manuscripts that were patroned by the elite, didn't necessarily mean that they were able to be read. And so even though you have the manuscript, it's still a lot based on oral recitation. So there are surahs. Surahs are kind of prayers, and then the surahs are divided into verses. Within the Quran, there are 114 surahs, and then the surahs are divided into smaller verses. The verses, the beginning and the end of a verse, is marked by a triangle made of 5 gold circles. Okay, so that's, let's see if I have it on the next page, right here. So these circles is what kind of tells you the break from verse to verse. The title of each surah is written in gold and framed by some sort of ornate rectangle. So that is what is represented here in the center. So this center gold, that the negative space here is some more calligraphy. This is kind of the title that is for the next surah, and it extends all the way through the page's margin. Okay, there you're going to see that the margins are very widely spaced. You're going to see a lot of negative space within these calligraphy type of manuscripts and writing, because they believe that that shows the importance and the dignity and the wealth of the script. So getting a little bit closer and breaking it down a little bit more, because really that's what this art piece is about. This art piece is, AP just kind of wants you to be able to understand that it's a page out of the Quran, but B, they want you to understand a little bit of the complexities of calligraphic script. And so what we have here is each line, now these white lines that are on here, are not permanently on here. These have been added just to kind of show you how this works. But each line is divided into a set number of interlines. So just kind of like when you were learning how to print, in kindergarten, and you had that lined paper that showed you the top of the line, the bottom of the line, and then we usually had a dotted line in the middle, and that would help us understand, where to make our circle for our lowercase letter d, and how far to bring up the vertical part of our lowercase d and when to stop. Okay, it's kind of the same thing. So the but it's divided, more into more sections, and it's the various heights of these, vertical and horizontal lines that help you distinguish one letter from another. Um, of course, like I said, there were none of these lines and rulings was on the parchment paper itself, but there was probably this was laying underneath the parchment paper so that the scribes could use this to help kind of make sure that their calligraphy and that their script was, measuring up. Um, Again, these are the dots that help recognize the vowel signs. These are the dots that show you the end of one verse and the start of another, remembering too that it's read from right to left. Our next image is also about calligraphy, even though we're looking at a form, and even though it's of metal, it also is heavily a great example of the use of calligraphy. And it's called the Basin or the Baptistery of de St. Louis. It was made by Muhammad al-Zain from 1320 to 1340. We are looking at a brass bowl that has been inlaid with gold and silver. I know that the precious materials that were used for this is important to AP, so please make sure you take note. We're looking at 3 different types of metals here. Remember what inlaid means. It means that the entire surface was brass, but then within, carvings within the brass or indentations within the brass, then you lay gold and silver within those indentations. So again, just a really impressive and meticulous technique. One of the most important things I know that AP wants you to make note of is that the artist has signed this piece 6 times, so his signature is on this piece 6 different times. The origin of this piece comes from Egypt or Syria, and interestingly enough, the original use was meant to wash hands. It was a hand washing basin for official ceremonies. But later, the piece became used for baptisms for a French royal family. So it's a mystery as to how it ended up in the French court, but it definitely, is a wonderful sign again of, either pilgrimage or that, silk trail and different, kind of cultures exchanging, different items. It's just a great example of one piece having an original intent, and then it wind up kind of having a different function in a different culture for a different reason. On the side of the basin, you have battle scenes along the sides. You have Mamluk hunters, and slaves who asserted their independence and eventually then reigned the area and the Mongol enemies. So you have this kind of, historical representation on the outside of the basin. The Mamluk people were known as very fine crafters. On the bottom of the bowl, there are decorations and repeated patterns of fish, eels, crabs, frogs, and crocodiles. Um, Normally, this would have been something that was carved with patterns and calligraphy, but this basin is kind of an original because it actually has animals and figures in it, which is very non-typical. But the entire exterior and the interior is totally covered in carvings, and then, like I said, inlaid with gold and silver. Um, the composition is very dense and overlapped. You would almost give it another description of a horror vacui. There's a lot of movement and energy um, of all human and animal shapes within this composition. Here are some close-ups for you to look at. Um, This right here, okay, when on the other page, when I said the artist had signed it 6 times, well, this is his signature. So we have that calligraphy, and this was just repeated around the basin 6 times. Okay, so it became like part of the design. Um, this is a close-up of the figures, and you can really see if you look closely, kind of that Mongol influence. You can kind of see the structure of that face and kind of that Persian cultural atmosphere. There is speculation that the basin was made for someone that was not a Muslim. Perhaps it was even made as an export, as a good to be sold, traded, or sold in market. But the it's unknown what the actual original um, patron was for it, or if it was just something that was kind of traded and sold in market. And then again, this is the artist signature up here. So I'm reminding you again, when you look at these colors, again, please keep in mind that these are all little intricacies that have been carved out of the brass and then inlaid and pressed and hammered in with silver and gold. So again, when you think of that artistry and that craftsmanship, it's really quite remarkable that these things are even able to be made with such great detail. This is called the Pyxis of Al-Mughira. It's from 1960 or 968 CE, and it is made of pure ivory. And this is another really beautiful example. We just talked about horror vacui. Again, if you think back to the sarcophagus, the Isenham sarcophagus with Alexander the Great, it really is reminiscent of that composition, and even the same with the basin prior to it. Even though the basin is a different medium and a different arrangement, you still get that idea of that there's absolutely no negative space left untouched, that every part of the material has been dealt with, has been carved, has been treated, and has been touched by the artist. So that's how you can kind of look at the horror vacui. So again, we have the calligraphic inscriptions in Arabic, which identifies the owner. which is why this is kind of, like the basin is getting placed within the calligraphy section. Um, and also in Arabic, it asks for Allah's blessing, and it also tells us the function of the pyxis. So the function, what it was, is it was a container, but made for like expensive aromatics. So all of these carvings that we see on here go all the way through the ivory. So that's actual negative space. And if you open up the lid and you put in, fresh herbs and things that are very aromatic and smell good, then all of that aroma it's protected, but then it's able to seep out of all of those carvings. We know that this was actually a gift, and it was a gift for the caliph's younger son, who was 18-year-old Al-Mughira. We have motifs of vegetation and geometric motifs. We have 8 medallion scenes that show activities of pleasure in the royal court, such as hunting and falconry and sports and musicians. The origin of this pyxis is from Muslim Spain, and it's an ivory carving, which was a common royal practice in Muslim Spain. So it was it's still a very special material, only kind of used for royalty or the very, very elite, but it was a common thing to do in royal Spain. Ivory is very durable, it's smooth, it's elegant, it's easy to carve, and it was very desirable for sculpture work. Um, Probably what we're seeing here is a cross section of the elephant's tusk. So the diameter of this pyxis was probably the diameter of the trunk itself. You have Arabic and Kufic script around the top, and it reads God's blessing, favors joy, beatitude to Al-Mughira, son of the commander of the faithful. May God have mercy upon him in the year 357. Okay, so that is up here in this calligraphic and Kufic script. And the next part is going to begin our Persian manuscripts, which will be part 2 of your screencast. We'll go over Persian manuscripts and architecture. Hopefully you have learned a lot so far, and we'll be able to continue on and finish up our content area of Islamic art.